Ladies and gentlemen, I was supposed to talk to you about how students learn, but then I met my esteemed colleagues this afternoon here, and I decided to change the name of my speech, my talk, a little bit. I'm going to concentrate on the question of how students learn to diagnose clinical cases. Studying clinical reasoning is an activity that is carried out more and more in medical schools because clinical reasoning is perhaps the most important ability that we want to install in our students. And I'm doing research in this field for already 30 years, I think. Besides working with colleagues at Erasmus University, I also work with colleagues here at LKC, Lucy Osby, Jerome Lofgans, Naomi Lobier, and in particular, we have started a new approach to clinical reasoning, namely studying the neuroscientific processes that go on when doctors and students try to solve problems. Solving medical problems is really a challenging, a daunting task. There are a large number of diseases and a limited number of complaints that people can utter. There is a lot of overlap among diseases with regards to the complaints. If somebody comes to you and speaks about chest pain, is it a symptom of cardiac or pulmonary problem? Is it a myocard? Is it a pulmonary embolism? Has it to do with the esophagus? And then also context plays an important role in clinical reasoning. We have done a study in the Netherlands in which in the morning we showed residents in internal medicine a Wikipedia page on Q fever. And we asked them to read the Wikipedia page, check whether the signs and symptoms were correct, whether the pathophysiological explanation underlying the complaints were correct, and then they would go back to their clinics and do their work, and in the evening some other researcher would come by, or came by, with about 8 cases, and this researcher said, you know, we need these cases for medical education, and we know the diagnosis, but please diagnose them for us, so that we can see whether the diagnoses are accurate. And it turned out that in this, among these 8 cases, there were 2 cases that looked like Q fever, but were not Q fever. And the number of mistakes that these residents were making was 100%. So they were influenced by the simple experience of watching a Wikipedia page. Context in medicine is extremely important, and it leads to problems more often than not. Another issue that makes diagnostic reasoning so difficult is the unique presentation of the complaint. Patients present their complaints in rather unique ways, and sometimes signs and symptoms that should be there are absent, and signs and symptoms that should not be there are present. So that all makes diagnostic reasoning a difficult task. But how do we teach clinical reasoning? It is largely, at least in many of the medical schools, left to the clinical rotation. It's learning by doing and learning by observation. You see a model doing engaging in clinical reasoning, and you try to follow her or his way of dealing with diagnostic problems. But the number and the variety of clinical problems seen during clinical rotations is often quite limited. One of my PhD students spent time with students in one of the teaching hospitals at Erasmus University, and in the 6 weeks of internal medicine clinical rotation, they mainly saw diabetes problems and nothing else. There's another study by Redner showing that only 6% of students saw a patient with peptic ulcer in an internal medicine clerkship. So the amount of experience that we give our students is clearly not sufficient. Not sufficient at all. And it becomes more and more difficult because access to patients becomes more and more difficult. And therefore, medical schools began to organize clinical reasoning programs, clinical reasoning training themselves. They began to prepare their students, training them to work with different critical cases and try to diagnose them. What I'm going to talk about today with you is a technique that Sylvia Mamede, a colleague from Brazil, who now works in Rotterdam, and I have developed a couple of years ago. It is an approach to teaching that we call deliberate reflection. You know, everybody reflects. You know, when you listen to me, you reflect, and you try to relate whatever I'm saying to your own experiences. And of course, when people diagnose a case, they reflect. But maybe they do not reflect sufficiently. Let me show you the procedure that we have invented to deal with more deliberate reflection of a clinical case. We present cases like this, the whole case, that contains all the information necessary to diagnose a case. You don't have to read it. Why don't you read the first 5 lines? That will be enough. I'm not going to ask you a diagnosis. Okay, this is certainly enough. Now what we do is this. We ask students to come up with a diagnosis. And then we say to them, please list all the signs and symptoms in the case that support your diagnosis. And then list all the signs and symptoms in the case that do not support your diagnosis. And then look for signs and symptoms that should be there and are not there. Now, if a student would work on a case like this is the description of the procedure. What he or she would do is he would say, yeah, I think this person has asthma, has an attack of asthma. And then she would write down chest tightness, dyspnea, cough, wheezing, attack after exercise or exposure to allergens, remission of symptoms, hypoxemia. And then findings that speak against this diagnosis is age of onset, without a history of allergy, no family history of asthma. And then there would be a number of findings expected to be present but not described. For instance, the accessory muscle use and prolongation of the expiratory phase. And then we would ask, while doing this, is there some other diagnosis that come to mind? And in most cases there is. And then we go over the procedure again. In this case, the person came up with the idea of COPD as an alternative hypothesis. And then perhaps even a third time would be needed around the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. And then we would say, what is your final diagnosis? So that is the idea. Deliberate reflection, systematic going over the case, looking for signs and symptoms that support your ideas, but also looking for signs and symptoms that do not support your diagnosis. Now, one of our first studies was a study with residents in which we tried to find out whether this procedure indeed would lead to better diagnosis. And we had a group of residents in internal medicine, and we presented them with 8 simple cases and 8 complex cases. And you should realize that in the literature, deliberate reflection is not, reflection in general, is not always seen as something that really supports expertise in medicine. There are people, actually I was among them, and I'm still partly among them, that say the hallmark of expertise is immediate recognition, pattern recognition. And if you have to think about a case, then you are already in trouble. So it was certainly not certain that a procedure like that would not add to the confusion rather than help. This is the situation. We asked these residents to diagnose these cases, give us a first diagnostic hypothesis, and then enter into the deliberate reflection exercise. Now let me show you some of the results. Now, when you ask them to, with simple cases, to diagnose the case, in 60% of the cases they are right. And then when you ask them to deliberate about these cases, actually they become poor. Yeah, so this supports the idea that if you have to think about a case, it is not going to be better. But we also had complex cases, and we found exactly the opposite. You see their performance is quite poor. Only 10% of the cases were initially, in first round, diagnosed accurately, and then it went up to 0.3 in the deliberate reflection case. So deliberate reflection helps, but in particular when the cases are considered quite difficult. And you should realize, of course, that for medical students, all cases are difficult. In particular when they encounter them for the first time. We tried deliberate reflection as a teaching strategy. And we compared 3 groups of medical students. We gave them a number of cases. One group only produced the most likely diagnosis. Another group was asked to provide a differential diagnosis. And we want to hear more than one diagnosis, and then you have to choose for the best one. And the third group was initially asked for a single diagnosis, and then would engage in deliberate reflection. The picture that I'm going to show you is not that clear, but maybe I can point at some things. So there was a oh, all right. Oh, wow. You know, LKC, technology. So there's a learning phase where they see 8 cases, and this is their performance. This is the performance of the group that had structured reflection, deliberate reflection. This is the score of the group that had a differential diagnosis, and it is not. It is the same as the group who had to make an immediate decision. So, what you see here is that during the learning phase, those who were engaged in deliberate reflection became confused, and were doing actually significantly poorer than the other 2 groups, although they were randomly assigned to the condition. And then in an immediate test where they would receive cases with the same type of disease but different cases, you see that this deliberate reflection group is doing, again, poorer than the other 2 groups. But then a week later, you see the reverse. Then the deliberate reflection group is doing much better, significantly better than the other 2 groups. So it seems that the wrestle with different diagnoses, with support for these different diagnoses, initially leads to some sort of confusion, and then, you know, when the dust in the brain goes down, then suddenly there's the light of the right diagnosis. One last experiment, because I believe that my time is almost up. A question that we had was, what will happen to cases that are about different diseases, but that look like the disease for which you are trained? And we did an experiment testing this. You can see from the text that it was done in Unifenas Medical School, Belo Horizonte, Brazil. It shows that, that even in Rotterdam we are quite international. And in the learning phase, students were confronted with 2 cases of acute myocardial infarction, 2 cases of a word that I never are able to say in English correctly, and 3 filler cases. Filler cases are unrelated cases, but they hide the purpose of the researcher. Yeah. And then on a 1 week later diagnostic test, they received an acute myocardial infarction case, stable angina pectoris, a gastroesophageal reflux case, and then also 3 cases 2 cases look like the original case trained, and of course a case that was trained, and again 3 filler cases. And the assumption was that maybe in deliberate reflection you consider other hypotheses and have to reject them. But nevertheless, the consideration of other hypotheses might help you diagnose cases that you have not seen before. Now let's see what happens. This is the performance of the 3 groups. You have the non-analytical reasoning group. This is the group that simply has to get 1 diagnosis. There's the differential diagnosis group, and there is the structured deliberate reflection group. And what you see is that the differential diagnosis group during the training phase is doing almost significantly better than the other 2. Now, here is the 1 week later diagnostic test. So there is global performance on all criterion cases. These are the cases that were trained for. And what you can see is that the deliberate reflection group is doing better 1 week later than the 2 other groups. And I mean, the differences do not seem to be big, but if I say, the difference was 10%, then many researchers would be glad with a difference of 10% after a week of doing other things. And then, if you look only at the performance in the test on cases that were previously studied, there is the same effect. The deliberate reflection group is doing better than the other 2. And then, most interestingly, the performance in the test on cases of non-previously studied diseases, there is, again, a significant difference. So, people often ask, can deliberate reflection be used in diagnostic practice? Can it be used by doctors? And my answer is no, it cannot. Because in healthcare, you do not see the case as a whole. The case produces itself based on your diagnostic hypotheses. So if you don't think of something, you will never find signs and symptoms, physical examination results, or lab tests that do not support your diagnosis. And so, no. This cannot be a useful tool for professional practice. But it turns out to be a highly useful tool for medical education. And I'm very much in favor of confronting students far more often than we do with lots of cases, because of the lack of cases they actually see in professional practice compared to what they will see in professional practice, in the residency, compared to what they see in actual professional practice. Lots of cases, starting early, and then use rooms like this, team-based learning rooms, where you put students together, not as an individual activity, but as a group activity. Okay, here's the case. Go over it, talk about it, What are the signs and symptoms in favor of your diagnosis? Which are not in favor? Why not? Or why? And then come up with a final diagnosis. I believe that if we, as medical teachers, would intensify our attempts to help these students acquire the skill of clinical reasoning, we are doing a very good thing for healthcare. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And the next perspective is provided by Farhana Nakhooda from IBM Asia Pacific Singapore.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon with you to actually share a very different perspective with you. I'm actually going to be talking about an area that I'm very passionate about, and I hope by the end of this presentation you'll be as excited as I am about this space. And this is really about AI and healthcare, and how these two are coming together, and how it's really a combination of man and machine, not just machine alone, that's going to transform the way healthcare is delivered. So I'd just like to start off by giving you a few statistics which are kind of interesting. So first of all, 80% of medical data is invisible. What I mean by that, it's unstructured. It's sitting in a clinical note and a discharge summary. It's not something necessarily tangible that we can touch. The other thing is, doctors today are expected to become medical data repositories, right? There's medical literature and information doubles every 24 months. It's humanly impossible for clinicians today to keep up with all of this information. Another interesting fact, basically if you look at the amount of data on an individual through their lifetime, it's more than 1 million gigabytes. Okay? And think about Fitbit devices, all the other devices, information that people are looking at these days. Interestingly, 45% of medicine is not evidence-based, and we all know that it takes up to 17 years to translate science to practice, right? So this is really kind of setting the scene as to why AI is actually becoming more and more important in the healthcare industry. Now, many of you would know that, in the 1900s, we started with tabulating systems. We moved to programmable systems, and now we're in the era of AI. Interestingly, I always ask people, if you're not familiar with AI, the simple thing I like to tell people is that a programmable system is programmed, right? So if you ask it, does 2 + 2 = 4, it will say yes every single time. It's a business rule. AI system, if you say, does 2 + 2 = 4, it will come back to you and say, is that a math question? If so, then it's 4. But if it's a restaurant industry, 2 + 2 is 2 adults, 2 kids. In the automotive industry, that's 2 front seat, 2 back seat. It's about the context, right? So an AI system actually understands the context you're referring to. And the other part is there's so much data in medicine, as you know, right? And it's not just about data. We always talk about the 5 V's in data. Variety, different types of data. You've got imaging data, unstructured data in many forms. You even have sound. I mean, now people are even looking at things like echocardiograms. How can you compare them in an analytical way? Volume, velocity, speed. If you're looking at ICU data, it has to be real time. Veracity, the truth of the data, and finally, value. So it's really about bringing what we're all familiar with, which is the data-driven method of data that we're all, used to, and moving to knowledge-driven methods and bringing them together. So looking at how can you have a system that can read a textbook, understand and contextualize that information, and bring it back to you at the point of care, for example, right? And what I'm going to do in the next bit of my presentation is actually give you real-life examples of where AI is being applied in medicine today, where it's going in the future as well, and then just a little bit how this ties back to education. So first of all, every time I present this anywhere, it's like, oh, is this AI going to take over from doctors? Absolutely not. It's about humans plus AI, hence why the title, Augmented Clinical Intelligence. Now, I think all of you in the room would agree that medicine is both a science and an art. And people excel at things like common sense, imagination, compassion, morals. AI cannot do that, right? AI has the ability to understand natural language. It can do pattern identification. It never gets tired. And it does machine learning and again, this endless capacity. So you bring those two together and you can imagine the power it brings. So ultimately, it's a system that understands and contextualizes natural language at mass scale. It reasons. It can search through millions of pages of data in seconds, recognize context, and basically come back with a recommendation for you. And the nice thing is, it will point you back to the evidence where it came up with that. If it says, I am 90% confident that this is the correct treatment option for a patient, it will then point you back to all the literature, the evidence, the medical textbooks, journals, that it supports that. It learns. The more you use the system, the smarter it gets. And that's where the concept of machine learning comes. And then finally, it empowers you. Right? So this is just an example, this is a clinical case, but you can see there's a lot of words that a machine would have to understand. What's a symptom? What's a diagnosis? If it says a non-smoker, you need to be very sure that it understands it's not a smoker, right? And if you do just text searches, it would capture smoker, right? But you have to know that it's not. And those are the kinds of things that AI has the ability to understand. So I'm going to give you a quick example of an application that's being used today. This is basically used in the veterans hospitals in the US. It's being used in a hospital, Apollo Hospital in India, as well as some hospitals in Korea. But this is a solution. Watson, by the way, is the IBM AI solution. However, I can tell you AI is big. If you look at the number of startups in Silicon Valley, the number one group of startups are AI startups for medical use, right? So there's a lot of different AI solutions. So this is just one example. You would basically have a cancer patient with a tumor, and you would basically do whole genome sequencing. You would take that information and you would run it through the AI system. And the first thing it does is it actually goes through 20 different sources of content, including medical articles, journals, etc. Now, which are these articles that they picked? That basically the AI system is learning from? It's actually from the top genetic organizations and across the world. So we basically worked with genomic institutes and cancer societies across the world to say, what are the most important content that you use every day to search? And the idea is you want it to be updated, for example. So what it would do, it goes through that and it comes back with the driver mutations, then it comes back with the associated pathways, and it will actually come back with a treatment recommendation for that patient based on their genetic profile, right? And then, of course, it's up to the doctor to make the final decision. This is decision support. So I'm going to show you a quick video that actually explains what I just said very quickly. I hope there's volume. And there's no volume. Is there sound coming? Actually, let's start it again. I guess that means I'm on. We just tested this at the break, it worked, so it should work.
Probably Watson
Okay, so while they're fixing it, maybe I can continue talking a bit about this. So just to give you an example, right? I mean, many people are possibly skeptical about, does this really provide true beneficial outcomes? Is it working? And I think that what I was going to share is that there's actually studies now been done, right? Where they've actually taken a tumor board, taken 1,000 patients, compared what AI would have come up with versus what the tumor board came up with. And what was interesting is that there was actually, the AI system was 99% similar to what the doctors came back with, which is a good thing. However, what it also did is it identified, in 30% of the patients, it identified additional mutations that the clinicians had not found on their own, right? And of those, 44 patients had actionable mutations, which means they could alter the treatment. So this is, again, really where things are going, where the power of technology like this has the ability to actually transform and improve healthcare. So shall I try again? And no sound again. Okay, well, why don't I keep going? So another example is clinical trial matching. Now what's interesting is that only 3 to 5% of patients end up getting into clinical trials. And a lot of it has to do with the eligibility criteria and trying to find the right match. And in fact, 20% of patients are actually eligible to get in, but only 3 to 5% get in. And unfortunately, by the time that many patients get in, it's too late. And so one of the things that, again, AI can play a big role is actually using that system to do clinical trial matching. So this is an 18-month project where we actually, by using AI systems to do clinical trial matching, we increased enrollment from 3.5 per patients per month to 6.3 patients per month. And this was for a breast cancer ambulatory practice. And then we did this with the expansion to experimental therapeutic programs, and it went from 3.5 to 8.1 patients per month. So again, here's a very big benefit of a system like this. A few other quick examples I'd like to share, and for dermatology, there's been a lot of work looking at machine learning and deep learning to say, can a machine learning system actually identify a patient has melanoma by their mole better than, say, a clinician could, just by analyzing those images. And again, we're finding that there's a very, very strong capability that AI has to actually learn. The more images you feed an AI system, the more it learns and identifies patterns that are just almost humanly impossible to detect by human eye alone. Another interesting example, medical records in hospitals, right? I mean, there's a lot of gaps, and if a clinician doesn't put that medical information in, it's a gap in the historical data of the patient. And so again, by applying AI, what we did here is we looked at the echocardiograms, and on the echocardiograms, it'll actually, for example, show you on the corner the diagnosis of aortic stenosis. We went through all the images and extracted that text data, and we found that 23% of patients who were identified actually did not have that same diagnosis in their EMR record. It was only when we extracted it from their echocardiogram that we knew it was there as well. Where things are going, the exciting area, of course, is imaging. You can imagine radiologists have to look at so many images every day, and being able to have machine learning and AI systems go through millions of records and identify and diagnose patients with very high accuracy. This is huge. And again, it's not about necessarily taking away jobs from radiologists, but if you can tell radiologists, look, these images are normal, focus on these, right? That will take a lot of strain. And in fact, they say, and there's been a lot of information statistics, that radiologists, if you give them the same image in the morning and the same image at night, they sometimes see different things, right? And that comes from eye strain, it comes from a number of different things. So again, you can imagine the power of this. A few other quick last examples. There's a lot of work that's going on now between looking at, for example, real-time machine learning. So if you're familiar with Medtronic, it's a company that takes care of type 1 diabetics. I mean, they have a lot of different things. But what we're doing here is they have, these patients have insulin pumps real-time, and we're pulling this data in real time. And what we're able to do is we're able to predict 3 hours in advance whether a patient is going to be hypoglycemic. And this mobile app can actually wake them up in the middle of the night and alert them to say, hey, go eat something. And as you know, many people that are hypoglycemic, they don't know, and they end up fainting, and they end up actually, in many cases, going into a coma and more severe things. So again, being able to use this to actually assist patients through mobility is becoming very big as well. And this is a very interesting one. This is around looking at speech analysis of patients, especially elderly patients, to see whether by just speaking to them and understanding their speech patterns, whether they have Alzheimer's, whether they have mild cognitive impairment or subjective cognitive impairment. And this was an example where our research team did a huge study and basically with 92% accuracy could tell the difference between those that had subjective cognitive impairment versus Alzheimer's, for example, right? And my last couple of examples here, this is a very big one in the context of Singapore. As you all know, the hospitals are full, and they really are all focused on getting patients home. And so how do you put sensors in people's homes, especially elderly people? And now even what they're saying is, can we discharge patients early and sensor up their home and actually provide the same medical treatment they would get in a hospital, but remotely, right? And so here is an example where, again, our research team has put in thousands of sensors in people's home, and they're starting to use AI and taking in all the sensor information. So for example, if all of a sudden your elderly father is going to the toilet, 12 times a day when he used to go 4 times a day, maybe he has a UTI, right? I mean, there could be other things going on. And so this is, again, where it gets very exciting. There's a lot of potential. Of course, there's lots of concern for false positives. He just maybe had something bad that day and, he's going to the toilet. But of course, this is where you have to understand the pattern of behavior and look at what is classified as normal pattern, and then of course what is an outlier and what is a concern that actually should be addressed. So how does this, by the way, is my video working? I really want to show everyone this video, so I'm not sure if it's working. Is it working? Because then I just want, my last thing is just a quick video to end off with as well. Right? Okay, let's cross our fingers. Yeah.
You can simplify complex information at any time. You could identify options where patients can determine most. You have a solution that provided insights to help you identify therapeutic options for your cancer patients. What if this was all possible with Watson for Genomics? Let's take a look at the possibilities. After a patient's DNA goes through next-generation sequencing, IBM Watson for Genomics is able to process and analyze the data. You are able to upload the case and add the tumor sample. The first thing Watson for Genomics will do is provide you with a summary of the
This video is cursed, I think. Okay, maybe not. We're not going to do the video. So why don't I end off with how can all of this be applied in medical education, right? And I just have a really, again, I guess the sound won't work, but I have another video just to show you where I think, and we can have more of a discussion on this after, in terms of how you can imagine this ability to start understanding medical literature, bringing this back at the point of care, could all be applied. Let's see.
Learning can propel us from where we are now to places we can only imagine. But with technology, imagination becomes reality. A reality where every learner has access to their own personal virtual tutor at any time, from anywhere. Imagine a tutor that actually learns and understands, like us, but with breathtaking speed and unparalleled scale. Not just facts, but nuance and meaning, and helps every learner master the material by responding to what they know, how they feel, and where they need to go. But it does something else. It helps them learn how to learn, all while gathering data that fuel insights. Insights that help educators inspire learners, so they can reach their full potential. Because where learning flourishes, so do people. Imagine the possibilities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Third speaker, Prof Deborah Nestel. So now we get into the third perspective into the next part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very brief introduction, and thank you, Naomi, Olivia, for inviting me to inviting me to the conference. And I just have to say, what glorious surrounds we're in. I think I've been to a facility where the spaces for learning are just so beautiful. So that's a really inspiring note to start on. So thank you very much. So here goes. That's not what real patients value. And I'm going to speak with quite a different gear, I think, to that which we've heard from our first two speakers. And I am so excited to see how you guys put this together. And why we need to connect real and simulated patients. So the work that I'm going to present is actually based on, I'll say quietly, over about 35 years now, experience first in Hong Kong, where I lived and worked for about 10 years, then in London at Imperial College, and now in Australia. In Australia, I have a split appointment between the Department of Surgery at Melbourne University and Monash University in broader health professions education. And that little bit of background I think is important in the way it manifests in the story that I'm going to tell. And of course, key values, those of you who know me will probably know me as a qualitative researcher. I also think that presentations like this are meant to really prompt deliberate and highly critical reflection on our practice. And that's really what I'm hoping to achieve. And although I'm drawing on my work principally in simulated patient methodology, I believe it has relevance to all simulation modalities. But just before we progress, who here has ever had anything to do with an OSCE? A PACES exam? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Just for me to get a sense of the landscape of experience, which is obviously very cursory. I just make these disclosures. I will be making reference to works that all emanate from this. And again, I'm very grateful for the financial support that I received to come here. So, back to the title. It's about 15 years ago that I had shown a simulated patient, and I'm probably going to say SP hereafter. I'd shown an SP-based consultation to what was then called a patient liaison officer at the hospital that I was working at in London, St Mary's Hospital. And together, I thought we witnessed a really good consultation. And it was set in the outpatient department, and it was based on a real event that had occurred for a patient and told through one of my clinical colleagues. But the patient liaison officer said to me, yeah, well, it's good that you're doing this, but that's not what all patients value. And she went on and on, and I was very deflated. I was quite hurt because this was a challenge to my core practice, something that I'd been doing for about, at that stage, about 20 years. She thought that it was very medicalized that we were presenting. That even when I presented her the SP role, so the OSCE station example, that's not how patients narrate their story. That's not how patients think about their illnesses, their conditions, their experience of stress. And I'm glad that I remained really open to the critique that I was experiencing because it has subsequently changed my practice. So a really profound impact. And it's that story that I'm going to share with you now. So what I'm going to do, I divide the presentation into these 4 parts. I'm going to share some terms with you just so we're all on the same page. Then I will present my proposition, some strategies that I've used to address the challenges associated with that proposition, and finally some future considerations, all the while reacting and deliberately reflecting to the sorts of things that I'm sharing. So, the terms. And I apologise if this might seem really fundamental. But this first notion of patient-centred care. So this description comes from, I can see the references there, particularly from the People Institute. And I just love the title here, Through the Patient's Eyes. And this is a really important point that I want to make in the whole presentation. If this is the only thing that you're going to take, please let it be this one. That with patient-centred care, patients really ought to be at the centre of the clinical care process. So this is patients' ideas, concerns, their feelings, their reasons for consulting, their need for information, that these are all sought and they're acknowledged and valued. The patients are encouraged to participate in all decisions about their care to the extent that they're able and willing to do so. So, I debated whether to keep this in or not, but there's just something rather delightful about the language that's been used. And you can see this was published in 1998. It probably reflected a decade or sort of experience prior to that. But thinking about a simulated patient as a normal person who's been carefully coached to present the symptoms and signs of an actual patient. So I really love this version of an actual patient, but you can see even in this early framing that there was a focus on that medical presentation. And at the risk of self-promotion. Simulated patients, so this is the way I think about simulated patients, that they're well individuals who are trained to portray patients. So I'm not focusing in on signs and symptoms, that's incorporated in that whole portrayal, and that they also provide learners with feedback, and there are limitations with that definition as well. So now I'm moving to an idea that I think I would like to promote, but in reality, I don't often see this. So I'd like to think about simulated patients as proxies for real patients. And a small, but I think a very important diversion here, some of you might have noticed that I haven't used the phrase standardised patient. I am on a actually it's not a single-handed mission. I'm going to do away with this phrase because if you think about it, it is so in tension with the way that we might think about individuality, about person or patient-centeredness. So I try to think about simulated patients who, when applied upon, for example, for OSCE or PACES reasons, so for high-stakes examinations, are required to standardise their performance. But it's not the person who's being standardised. Got that off my chest. So, here goes. So, one other phrase that I want to mention is simulation, and this phrase by David Garber, an anaesthetist and aviator who's had a very profound impact on contemporary healthcare simulation. And he describes simulation in this way. It's a technique to replace or amplify real experiences with guided ones. It's often immersive in nature, and it evokes or replicates aspects of the real world in an interactive fashion. And here we see this replicated in a physiotherapy example there, and you can see the bullet points on the left as simply highlighting the terms that David Garber used in his description of simulation, and I think beautifully illustrated even in a still image. So, my proposition. been going on for a little while now. We've heard from several people today with respect to sort of making reference to Sir William Osler, and I'm going to position this as well, that the best teaching is taught by the patient, in this instance himself. Part of my proposition is that in healthcare simulation, we need to find ways to connect real patients with simulation patients or our simulations across all of these phases. And actually pretty much any learning event will have this preparatory phase. There'll be some sort of briefing information. There'll be the simulation activity or other learning activity, some feedback, debriefing, some individual reflection, be it deliberate or otherwise, and then an evaluation component. And in these phases here designed for simulation, that evaluation simply refers to the extent to which the learning objectives have been met, rather than an individual assessment of a participant. But thinking about our educational design by looking at these phases, I think it's a really illuminating way to find opportunities to link real patients with our simulation ones. So my argument goes that without real patient involvement, much SP-based work is a mirror for the teacher's preconceptions rather than an authentic reflection of a patient encounter. And I'm not suggesting in any way that this is an intentional, manipulative, evil ploy of teachers or faculty. I'm simply trying to highlight the challenge for those who are immersed in teaching and the delivery of healthcare to see through the eyes of someone who is not, or someone who's the recipient of care. Rosamund Snow, who tragically died in this last year, Rosamund spoke openly about her very long history of diabetes, and she had a role as a patient advisor at the BMJ, and she did some really exquisite work at the Sales Simulation Facility in central London, amongst many other things. And from Rosamund, she reported on her observations of patients represented in different simulation modalities by saying that the patient voice continues to be filtered through clinicians' perspectives. She goes on to write, when no real patients are involved, this is in the design of educational, simulation-based educational activities, but I think it has wider application. Two major assumptions made. Firstly, that actors and faculty members who brief them can really simulate patients, that they know how real patients would respond in a given scenario. And secondly, that learning outcomes set by healthcare personnel are the most appropriate for the situation, that real patients would want students to learn those things. The complexity of this challenge of seeing through patients' eyes, I think is so clearly evident in the many published accounts of doctors' experiences as patients and how utterly different being on the receiving end of care is to that of being a professional provider. And each of these books, and some of them bestsellers, and some of them exquisitely moving, document that healthcare providers' experience of being a patient. And quite recently, some of you may be familiar with Kate Granger, who again very sadly died this past year. And she created this hashtag of Hello My Name Is as a means of trying to remind healthcare providers that they're, as a patient, you often see so many healthcare providers, and that very basic introduction of who you are had actually had quite a powerful impact on her. Now changing gears. Professional medical standards have come under scrutiny with some really high-profile cases of poorly performing and unethical clinical practices of doctors and other healthcare providers. And the Kennedy report into the high mortality rates in the paediatric surgical unit makes several recommendations for embedding patient and public involvement in the NHS. Professional associations and licensing bodies increasingly promote these active roles for patients and the public. And indeed, the specialist royal colleges acknowledge the importance of patient involvement in education and professional issues via patient liaison representatives and so on. And even the most recent outcomes for the graduates makes very clear the role that patients can play, active roles that patients can play in health professions, education, or at least in medical education. So patients can contribute unique and invaluable expertise to teaching, feedback and assessment of medical students, and we should be encouraging and facilitating this. From Alan Leakley and John Bly, these very profound words, but where patient-centeredness is typically framed as a set of values and virtues learned from doctors as role models, and reinforced through structured educational input from medical educators, then patient-centered is paradoxically not learned from patients. It's learned from the very people who write books about their profound experiences of being a patient, because through their professionalization process, and it's a very important process, so I'm not arguing with that, but it distances you. It helps you see, to experience that process differently. So, the evidence. So, there I'll be zooming along at this point. So it's a qualitative study, 3 focus groups of simulated patients who worked across several universities in Melbourne and undertook thematic analysis. And what we found was, remember that statement I made earlier about thinking about simulated patients as proxies for real patients? Actually, these simulated patients that we interviewed, they were proxies for the clinicians who, and the faculty, who were providing them with paid work, who provided them with SP roles that looked like a medical history, not like a story that a patient would tell. And I think part of this has been this prominence of the OSCE and the way in which SPs have I'm going to move on. Here are some quotes. With respect to the OSCE, this SP in the focus group reported that I find the OSCE cases, they're a bit superficial because they're not a real doctor-patient relationship anyway. You've got to get done in 8 minutes, and I feel like it's all fake. Still with the OSCE, the candidate says some things which, if it was said to me in a normal setting, I would not have reacted well to, and yet you're aware of the time, you think it's not part of my role. The brief actually said you're not emotional, and it's like, there's no way in a real setting I would not be emotional at this stage. So neither authentic or patient-centered, but the SP followed the faculty instruction to achieve a fair examination. And this statement was made in the context of SPs talking about examiners training them to portray roles in OSPs. And it just demonstrates different ways of thinking and doing between examiners and SPs. Probably in terms of training, I've seen sometimes the examiners do a role play that hasn't been helpful, that I thought has been really awkward for everyone in the room, because it's about the examiner's personality and wanting to model something which I, as a simulated patient, in discussion with other sim patients afterwards, what do you do in that situation? It's as though in some simulation work, particularly in OSCEs and PACER-style exams, that a simulate from effect has occurred, and that's where the simulation becomes more real than the reality, so that the copy of the copy takes on greater meaning. So some of the strategies. What can we do? Well, my plea is, you've seen this slide already, thinking about where on that cycle you can connect real patients with simulated ones. And I'm just going to run through a few examples of how this might occur. So working with my colleague, and in fact Tony Turney is here, we did this work years ago where we wanted to provide new medical students with an opportunity to have conversations about things medical with patients. And so we also appreciated that the GMC was placing pressure to have lay involvement in medical education. And so we invited volunteers to write us their story the last time they'd been to see a family medicine doctor or GP. And we created a number of new roles quite quickly, and they were in very different language to that which we thought were representing patient voices. Second example, complex interventional skills. We thought we could do the easy stuff. We were actually quite aware of not necessarily having insight into what it was like to undergo a complex interventional skill. And so in this project here for carotid endarterectomy, where the patient is often conscious, and you can see a model placed on the side of the actor who has a audio link in his upper ear, and we're in the control room. We're just setting up at this stage. But what we did was interview patients who've actually undergone this experience to understand what it was like from their perspective and use their words to craft our SP role. And what we did there was create a composite rather than a single role, because in our learning objectives and also our research objectives, we just needed to have, refine some of the learning activities. So this is not a straightforward process with our educational hats on. Complex histories, again, we often teach in a single system rather than reflecting the reality of many patients that have comorbidities. So here a phased approach to, again, real patients identified from the outset, interviewed, telling their story in their structure, their sequence, rather than us determining that sequence as well. And we invited the SPs to work with real patients to craft what that final portrayal would look like. And this was not a straightforward process. It was extremely salutary for the SPs who were given access to personal information about experiencing complex comorbidities. And in sequential simulations, I think again in our educational practice, we often take a slice out of a patient's experience in a healthcare system. The patient moves this way through the healthcare system, whereas we tend to focus our educational activities on a single component. And simulation can be really beneficial in reminding our learners, be they undergraduates or qualified, that actually we can have that continuous story. And finally, actually to manipulate simulation, I go back here to the work of Rosalind Snow, and she drew on, again, on her personal experience of living with a chronic illness. And she had the opportunity at the Save Centre to work with 15 of her colleagues whom she recruited from an online forum to an advisory group. All of them had diabetes, and then 3 of them worked very closely with the centre's simulation experts to turn these patient-generated ideas into workable scenarios that could be run in the ED in the own wards. And then Rosalind and her colleagues were co-faculty. So really exciting work. So finally, to the future considerations. going back to this statement, yeah, you're doing good work, and it's really nice that you're thinking about patients' value, but actually this is not what real patients value. So what I've tried to do is just revisit some of those basic terms of simulation, of SP, of patient-centeredness. I've offered a proposition that as clinicians become highly professionalized, it's very challenging to be able to see through a patient lens because of that level of professionalization, and not because people are not empathic or unkind. It's just different. I've offered a few simple strategies in terms of getting real patients involved at various phases of simulation-based education, and pointed to some future considerations. Simulation-based education has a simulacrum, risks a simulacrum effect. It can minimize and make invisible real patients' experiences, and it just risks drifting from those whom it's intended to support. We've got to reconsider patients' voices at all stages of simulation-based education, and not all the time, but often enough to make sure that we ground it in practice. And to be truly patient-centered, patients need to be invited to participate so that we can hear their voices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm taking on the challenge of moderating this session for 15 minutes. And I have a language I'm going to give away, which is a really good knowledge of the participants and good knowledge of the conference. So maybe I start from there. They are here, I'm just trying to be the one sitting and looking at these three different perspectives of a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and thinking that among the audience there are people from 15 different countries. There are people that are students, health professionals, different type of people, and also different type of beliefs on what medical education is and what should be done about it to be transformed. So that we can say. So the only way to have a meaningful 15-minute conversation is to avoid being normative in terms of one or the other, but rather I would like to use your experience from different angles, and I look at them as really complementary and different. To maybe look back to the theme of the conference, which is we have the transforming medical education from three different aspects: the people, the practice, and the policy. So, can you please look back based on your perspective and see where you see your main contribution to the people, practice, and policy? Who wants to start? You want to start?
You always have these difficult questions, Nabil. This conference is about transformation, transforming medical education, and I think at least my two colleagues have provided new insights in how we could do that. I was particularly impressed by the discussion about simulated patients. I played as simulated patients also for quite a number of years in the 70s because I liked it, and indeed you were right. These scenarios were mainly based on the experiences of the doctors involved rather than the patients involved, and didactic, perhaps not always in the right way. The role of AI, I believe very strongly in AI at the wrong time, because in the 70s the knowledge-based systems were developed also for medicine, and they failed spectacularly. I thought your contributions show that AI can do a lot of good things for medicine and also for medical education. I have one reservation. It might lead to a situation in which medical students and doctors are going to trust these systems too much, and that the associated learning in medical schools might become somewhat more superficial because we have the systems. And we should never forget that the results of these systems require interpretation. And interpretation has to be done by the doctor, and the doctor needs, therefore, a deep pathophysiological understanding of disease in order to make sense out of these data. So I believe that only in very limited domains AI can replace human diagnosis, but it can be very helpful.
Have you answered my question? Maybe you can do answer.
Yeah, I think, obviously I'm the only one on the panel that's not come at this from an education perspective, but I think when we discuss this with Prof. Naomi and Nabil, AI is going to transform medicine, whether we like it or not. It's like the internet, right? I mean, it's there. And it's really, to me, very important, and what you said is so true. All the systems I talked about are trained by doctors, right? It's not that it's just left alone. The doctors have to point the system to the correct data. And that's really critical because, as you know, there's a lot of very good medical journals out there and there's a lot of not so good medical journals out there. And how do you know what is the right thing to train? And, this comes back to patients doing Googles, right? They Google their own information, they go see a doctor. And what's scary, to be frank, is that there are AI systems in some countries today that are diagnosing patients and patients trust them, right? So to me, I think, AI has the ability to transform healthcare in a very positive way. And I think all the medical literature and knowledge and content that we've talked about and the ability to understand natural language as well is going to impact education, right? Because if you have a system, in fact, we're working on a project right now with research that is looking at education as well and saying, is there a way that we can actually read content and bring back appropriate data to patients as well, or to medical students and other students. I think that's really where things are going to transform. And the other part I just mentioned is that a lot of the examples I gave are about personalization, right? And that is really what learning is becoming. It's everybody learns differently. Everybody has, some people are more visual, some people are, we all are very different in the way we think. And AI has the ability, hopefully, right? This is the promise, that it actually can learn your behavior over time and know what is the best way that you will learn, right? I have 2 small children and I can tell you they learn night and day, the way they think, everything. And this applies, it's a lifelong journey, right? So to me, I think it's about this ability to take this kind of technology and apply it. And I think Nabil is a very big advocate of this. And in fact, we have some projects going on that I think will have the ability, hopefully over time, we're all very excited, to transform the way that education is delivered.
So I've just been given a briefing to consider this question from the connecting real and simulated patient perspective. I actually think these are very small things that can be done to change practice in quite a compelling way. Very small changes of when you're writing OSCEs, having a real patient there to discuss it with, to push back. That's a simple task, a small task to do. And I suspect that could have a very, it's a check-in process, a confirming process, and it might address some of the cultural issues that perhaps lead us to over-focus on some elements of communications technical. So some of the activities associated with clinical practice that are are perceived as much more perhaps medical than an effective communication, which may be seen as a more generic skill. I think that could be really compelling.
I would like to open the floor a bit, ask you as a participant from the three perspectives, what aspects did you see as transformative in relation to people, practices and policies? Anyone wants to from different perspectives? No one? Yes.
Thank you. It's been a really interesting discussion. I think a lot of what all of you said would be transformative. Everyone made me certainly think in a different way. But I think isn't that the point of learning, is to think differently. So I guess my challenge to you, Farhana, would be, well, why are we personalizing things in a way that just goes along with the way people think they learn, rather than having them learn in different styles? So if so much of the kind of pattern recognition and so on could be done by machines, where is more of the focus on the compassion, the intuition, the channeling people to think differently, rather than just going along with what they already think they know and their style already, that we seem to think is innate. But actually, it's also just the way things are set up. Medical education selects for a certain type of learner. And I think we all acknowledge that the kinds of things we select medical students for are not what we really value in medical professionals. So how are we starting to address those issues? That's what I'd like to know.
Well, I guess since it was partially addressed to me, I can make a point. I mean, if you remember my second chart where I talked about what humans excel at and what AI excels at, that's the point, right? I mean, and I think this is all about human and machine. This is not about leaving an AI system to do all of this alone. At the end of the day, everything I shared was a decision support system. At the end of the day, a doctor or a nurse or a clinician is going to make the final call, right? Whatever it may be. It's guidance. It's just basically saying, based on evidence, based on literature, this is what it says. And ultimately, the human being that makes the final call can use their own compassion and knowledge to make the final decision, right? I think when we move to a world of robots, when they kind of do their own thing, then we have more of a concern. But I think in the way I see it, it's always going to be that human-AI interaction, never AI alone.
Just to let you know, if you have a question, there are mics in the tables.
Just to follow up on that point, I recall some hybrid simulations. So this is where a task trainer simulator is aligned with a human simulated patient. So the particular example I'm thinking of was for removal or excision of a melanoma. And our simulated patient was cued to say, for these junior doctors who were doing the excision, my sister died of malignant melanoma. Now, again, this was associated with research. Many of those, most of the participants didn't even hear the statement. When they looked at the video of their performance afterwards, they were mortified to hear that the patient had uttered those words. They were so consumed because they were relatively junior and they were just learning the skills of excision and closing the wound, and the cognitive load was just too much for them to offer that care and compassion and to hear that statement and respond empathically. So there was something rather glorious about the way on the slide where you had that humans excel at compassion. I think only when they have the mental capacity then to do with it, so that the AI might offer some, particularly for people who are learning, some way of managing that cognitive load.
So I have one final question to all of you, and something people ask a lot, which is the way the transformation is going to happen, and the role of research, scholarship, and practice in interaction. My question is, how do you envision transformation happen, and the role of the researchers, the practitioners, and the scholarly work that happening in this space to drive transformation? It's more about the way to actually achieve transformation.
I've had just a wonderful conference from the very beginning of the day. Professor Suresh and on to Professor Kumar, and each of the presentations fabulous. And with the vision that they have shared, that I can just see significant cultural shifting. Then I went to a workshop led by Helen Ward and her colleagues that looked about co-production, co-construction. This is mostly focused on research and educational activities, but this is where the transformation will occur. I think a shift in culture, that we have a wide stakeholder base and engage the user base in the development process.
I think these changes are always disruptive, and they are bottom up. I was still presenting my overhead sheets when suddenly the lecture theater was full with computers. Not my computer, but the students' computers. And if you have the belief that we can steer these processes, perhaps we can encourage them, but we certainly cannot steer them. It's bottom up.
Maybe I can Sure. Does this mean that someone else is actually driving transformation? Maybe the healthcare sector, not so much the education.
The students are driving part of it. Yeah, and the patients will be driving it. I think that many doctors are confronted with patients now in their consulting room that do self-diagnosis. Now, you can imagine what will happen when these AI systems become popular. They won't go to the doctors anymore, They will directly go to the pharmacologist.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for IT, as you know, it's really the younger generation, right? The millennials insist. I mean, it's not even, they're expecting technology to be part of everything they do. But having said that, I think research plays a massive role, right? Being able to try and test and actually look at real outcomes, right? I mean, there's so much technology out there that can do so many cool things, but is it actually improving patient care, right? And I think this is where research does play a fundamental role in making sure that these things are being done for good.
So thank you so much. I think we are on time to wrap up this interesting discussion. I hope you got really, it was purposefully designed to give you three very rich perspectives, all of them, and I hope you got something from it from the perspective of thinking about the way of the transformative education, that not from a normative way, but rather picking up the good elements from all perspectives and hopefully localize this into your own context. So thank you so much for being here. You have a break now and then we continue this exciting journey. Thank you.